Only One Thing, a Pymish story by Betsy, Hanson. The waitress knelt by the low table, bowed over her kimono-clad knees, and offered Nicholas Cleveland 2 forks. "For you and your wife," she said. "Oh, thank you," Nicholas said. "We know nothing of eating with chopsticks." "Flora is a quick learner, aren't you, my dear?" Dartmoor Barrington said as he poured sake for the Clevelands. "I used a fork the first time we came to this restaurant," Flora said, taking the decanter and filling Dartmoor's tiny sake cup. "The second time, too." "And now look at you," Dartmoor patted Flora's shoulder. "You can pick up individual grains of rice." Dartmoor turned then and spoke to the waitress in Japanese. She tittered in response, covering her mouth with her hand. "Is the waitress laughing because we are inept with the eating utensils of her culture?" Jane Cleveland wondered. "Or because we sit so awkwardly on this straw-matted floor, our legs dangling into the well below the table?" "His Japanese is very good." The waitress bowed again and rose from her kneeling position, astonishingly graceful in the constricting kimono. "Excuse me, I will get your dinner." The first sip of warm sake grabbed Jane's throat, but she was able to swallow without coughing and was grateful for the tiny serving. Nicholas emptied his cup at Dartmoor's urging and accepted a refill. "It's quite nice," Nicholas said. "Perhaps the Japanese answer to sherry?" Laura refilled Dartmoor's cup, her dark French twist a contrast to his rumpled ginger hair. He gently patted her cheek. "That's what's changed about my daughter," Jane thought. "Her face is angular now, not soft and round. And she has the beginnings of crow's feet around her eyes." At 35, Flora was a lovely, completely grown, a better word was mature, woman, with a good position as an Oxford hospital administrator, her own flat, enough income for nice clothes and holidays in Spain. But was this multilingual Dartmoor a dalliance or a marriage possibility? A woman of 35 is running out of options, Jane thought. Yet why would our Flora choose a man pushing 50? "Dart isn't in Oxford on the weekends," Flora had said when Jane had suggested that they come to Sunday tea at the vicarage. "He visits his mother in London." Some men are kind to elders," Jane had said. "Prudence's husband Geoffrey is well known for being good to his aunt. But don't you want to spend Sundays together for an amble or a film or a fish tea?" Even as she'd listed these possibilities, Jane had wanted to laugh at herself. Ambles, films, and fish teas were not the central activities of dating couples in the 1970s, she had read. Young women were emancipated and presumably amenable to that only one thing that men wanted. "Mom, Dart and I see plenty of each other all week long. A break keeps a romance fresh," Flora had said. A break keeps a romance fresh. Well, I suppose that applies to marriage, too, Jane had thought. Nicholas and I take breaks from each other even though we share the same house. He's busy with his parish work. I'm busy with my daily tasks and my garden and not with my grandchildren. Friends who were once available for ambles and films and fish teas were now busy caring for their children's children. Conversations veered quickly to grandchildren's adorable antics. Jane would listen and smile, but had no grandchild stories to share. The waitress arrived with lacquer bowls of a cloudy soup, plates of tempura prawns and vegetables, and white rice. While they ate, Flora deftly using chopsticks and Jane and Nicholas, the forks, Dartmoor told how he became fascinated with Japan on hearing tales from his missionary grandparents. He'd gone to Japan to study the language, returned to England to do a degree in Japanese history, and got a faculty position at Oxford. We met at that tea room on the high street, Flora said. Only old ladies, she glanced at her mother. I mean people who are not students go there. I wanted a cream tea. There was Dart at a table by the door. Bad luck. They had no green tea, Dartmoor said and kissed Flora's cheek. Good luck. I found Flora. The waitress arrived to clear the table. Very nice food, Nicholas said gallantly, even eaten with a fork. A pity that the menu has no raw tuna, Dartmoor said. Oh, I am sorry, said the waitress, but it comes from very far. True, still a disappointment, Dartmoor said. No raw tuna? A disappointment? Jane thought. She recalled the post-war days when any kind of animal flesh, even offal, was difficult to come by. And now a man must have his raw tuna. Yes, Jane told herself, I must ask Flora directly about her feelings for this self-centered man. How is your mother's health? Jane asked Dartmoor as they walked in the dark November drizzle to the car park near the restaurant. You visit her in London on the weekends? Oh, yes, my mother. Dartmoor's pale, freckled face was rosy from the sake. She is in Bloomsbury. Oh, Jane said, my friend Prudence lives there with her husband and sons. Your mother is not an invalid, I hope? Oh, no, quite hale, is Mum. She does need help with the shopping, carrying the bags up the stairs to her flat. She's lucky to have a weekly visit, Jane said. I suppose you're making up for lost time? Being far away in Japan all those years, we are pleased that Flora took a position in Oxford near us. I am pleased too, needless to say, Dartmoor said. At the car park, Jane was relieved to see Flora take the driver's seat. At least Dartmoor knew he was too sake-influenced to drive. Rather extraordinary food, Nicholas said as Jane handed him his bedtime Ovaltine. The prawns were tasty, Jane said, though I didn't care for the soup. Flora said Dartmoor has that soup for breakfast, and rice, and green tea. Extraordinary, Nicholas said. But he is so old. Jane sprang up from the sagging easy chair. A man of nearly 50? He is not the person I would choose for Flora. Not our choice, my dear. Nicholas winked at his wife. And a man of his age has plenty of vim and vigor, as I recall. Oh, it's not that, Jane said. It's creating a family with Flora. Her time is running out. Ah, the grandchild question. Nicholas stood up and put his arms around his wife. Two things in life that we truly cannot control. One is the weather, the other, whether we have a grandchild. Her husband's words were wise, as always, but Jane lay awake that night going over the facts. Flora is 35. Her boyfriend is nearly 50. He's never been married, and he spends the weekends with his hale, if stare-averse, mother rather than Flora. Something about Dartmoor Barrington was as fishy as that Japanese soup broth. Bloomsbury. She'd ring Prudence and ask to drop in on Friday, and she would look up the address of a D. Barrington. I feel as if I have stumbled onto a theater stage where I am the only one not in costume, Jane thought, as she left St. Pancras Station. Young women in short skirts, tall boots, faux fur coats, young men in bell-bottom pants and suede jackets, their long hair curling over their collars. I could be a creature from another planet, Jane thought, even though my trench coat and navy blue beret are rather new, gifts from Flora. Mum, I can't have you going about in that old tweed, she'd said. But no one in this neighborhood is looking at me, Jane told herself, and, map in hand, found the side street with the address of a D. Barrington. The intercom box showed the Barrington flat on the 4th floor. Surely a newer building such as this had an elevator? Or perhaps it was unreliable. An older woman had to be ready to trudge up 4 flights. Jane pushed the buzzer. Hello? The woman's voice sounded younger than one would expect from even a hale elderly mum. Hello, I'm looking for Mrs. Barrington, Jane said. I am Mrs. Barrington. The woman's accent was like that of the Japanese waitress. Dartmoor Barrington's mother? Jane asked. The woman laughed. I am not his mother. She has died. Who are you? An old friend of Mrs. Barrington. I heard from someone that she lived in Bloomsbury. I didn't know that she had passed. Please accept my sympathy. Okay, I will tell my husband. What luck that I am speaking through the intercom so I don't have to show my furious face, Jane thought. Thank you, she said. And please tell your husband that Jane Cleveland, the vicar's wife, dropped by. Jane? Go, okay. A baby wailed. I say goodbye now. My son waked up. Striding toward Prudence's apartment near Russell Square, Jane was grateful for the spitting drizzle, though none of the gaudily dressed young people on the narrow sidewalks would have noticed nor cared that an Oxford vicar's wife of a certain age, in a newish trench coat and a jaunty beret, was crying. You're sure there isn't another D. Barrington? Prudence Manifold refilled Jane's sherry glass. It all makes sense, doesn't it? Jane said. The weekend visits to see his Japanese wife and son, never talking with Flora about the future. The scoundrel. Of course she doesn't know he's married. She wouldn't go out with her parents and a married man to drink sake and sip fishy broth out of lacquer bowls. Prudence blinked at this, but asked no questions. She was used to Jane's odd proclamations. Oh, Prue, why can't she have what you have? Prudence surveyed the untidy lounge with its view into the recently remodeled but equally untidy kitchen. The boys' football jerseys were in a heap by the sofa, and Geoffrey's rock collection was strewn about the dining table. A pile of laundry waited by the back door. Jane, there are many ways for a woman to have a satisfying life, Prudence ventured, but Jane shook her head. Young women only want one thing, a baby, and their mothers only want one thing, a grandchild. True to her name, Prudence advised Jane to speak to Flora right away, in person, not on the phone. When she arrived home, Jane would ring Flora and ask her to come by the next day, Saturday. Dartmoor Barrington would be in Bloomsbury then, lugging string bags of groceries up 4 flights of stairs for his mother. I did wonder about him, Nicholas said the next morning. All those years in an exotic locale and still a single man? I'll slip out so you can break the news to Flora alone. But just then their daughter burst in the front door. Good, you're both here. Flora hung her red maxi coat on a hook in the hallway and planted herself in the shabby easy chair. You'd both better sit down. Nicholas took the second easy chair. Jane perched on the ottoman. It's Dart. I've had it, Flora said. Oh, my dear, we were about to tell you, Jane started, but Flora didn't seem to hear. We're through. I can't stand it anymore. 3 times a day, every day. He only wants one thing. Nicholas's face flushed crimson. Oh, my dear, is it that, then? Jane started to ask, but Flora hissed, "Japanese food, morning, noon, and night. Japanese food that he makes at his flat, or Japanese food at that restaurant." I went along with it for a while, but nowadays I'm wanting a spaghetti bolognese or a curry, and he won't budge. Yesterday I surprised him with a nice fry-up for breakfast. When I put the plate in front of him, he said, "You should know by now that I can't take an English breakfast," and stomped out of my flat. He looked relieved when I told him last night that it's over. Ha! He cares more about miso soup than he does about me. Good riddance. Jane murmured general words of sympathy, but she wanted to tell Flora that it is far better to end an affair because of an obsession with Asian food than because your man has a wife. Would she even have to tell Flora about the intercom conversation with Mrs. Barrington the younger? "Sorry, Mom and Dad, but I can't stay," Flora said. "I'm going to get some lunch, shepherd's pie and a nice pile of chips." Flora nearly skipped down the walk and turned to blow a kiss. "She doesn't seem the least bit upset, does she?" Jane said. "I should say not. She seems happy. She's free." Nicholas fixed his blue gaze on Jane. "But still, my dear, the grandchild question?" "That and the weather," Jane said. "Well, I am lucky to be a mother, and mothers only want one thing, for their children to be happy." "Indeed," Nicholas said. "Now, how shall we spend this Saturday afternoon?" Jane thought for a moment. An amble? A film? A fish tea?" she said. "Splendid plan," said Nicholas. And splendid it was. Thank you.